August Cross was 38 years old, and 4 days before his wife handed him divorce papers, he had driven home from Columbus with the best news of his life folded in his breast pocket. $41.3 million, his great-uncle's entire estate, commercial properties across 3 states, liquid assets, a life's worth of quiet, extraordinary wealth, left to the one man in the family who ever listened more than he talked. August had bought champagne. He had booked a reservation at the restaurant where they had their first date. He was going to tell her Friday. He had the words ready. Then he came downstairs Friday evening and found his wife already at the kitchen table, not dressed for dinner, but sitting behind a manila folder with her hands folded on top of it. She was pregnant. The baby wasn't his. She had already spoken to an attorney. She just needed his signature. August picked up the folder, read every page, signed every line, slid it back across the table, and said nothing about Columbus. Nothing about the champagne in the refrigerator. Nothing about the $41 million she had no idea she had just walked away from. What happened next, she never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The number was $41.3 million. August Cross had looked at it 4 times in 4 hours, and it still sat on the page like it belonged to someone else's life. He kept both hands on the wheel. The highway back to Cincinnati was dark and flat, and the October wind was pushing hard enough against the car that he could feel it in his grip. He had the windows cracked anyway. The cold felt good. It felt real. He needed real right now. Philip Garrett's office was the kind of room that had absorbed a lot of significant moments. August could tell that from the way the attorney moved through the information, patient and unhurried, as if the number at the top of the asset summary were simply a figure to be properly understood, rather than the kind of thing that quietly reorganized a man's understanding of his own life. August had reorganized quietly. He asked about the tenants first. The commercial properties. Are the existing leases in good standing? Garrett had looked at him over his glasses with the mild approval of a man who had delivered this kind of news many times and rarely received that particular question first. He confirmed the leases were current and stable. August asked about the art collection next. Condition, provenance, storage. Then the liquid holdings. Then the staff Uncle Bill had employed. He did not ask what he could buy with it. Eventually, Garrett had reached into the portfolio and produced a sealed envelope. Inside was a single folded page, 4 sentences written in a hand that was small and deliberate and extremely legible. August, I met you once, at the family reunion in 1997. You were 12. I asked you what you wanted to build, and you told me for 11 minutes without stopping. That's the whole reason. August had read it twice. Then he folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in the breast pocket of his jacket, directly against his chest. Now, driving south on I-71, he thought about Petra. Not the number, not the properties spread across 3 states, not the Atlanta partnership offer he'd turned down 3 years ago, the one that had been sitting in the back of his mind like a folded map he never fully put away. Petra. He thought about the way her face opened up when something genuinely good happened, not the polished social version of her smile, but the real one, the one that arrived a half-second before she could organize her expression into anything. He had seen it the morning they found out they were approved for the mortgage. He had seen it the night he made dinner from scratch for the first time and somehow didn't ruin it. He wanted to see it again. He had been waiting 4 days for the right moment and the right setting, and now, with the Columbus City lights shrinking in his rearview mirror, he let himself plan it properly. Not over the phone. That was certain. This was not a phone call. He reached for his cell at the next red light and pulled up the number for Fiore on Madison. The Italian place. Their first date, 11 years ago. White tablecloths, candles that were slightly too tall for the holders, a waiter who had refilled his water glass so many times he started wondering if it was a nervous habit. Petra had ordered in what he later learned was almost correct Italian, and she had looked at him over her menu with the specific expression of someone who is deciding whether a person is worth the full version of themselves. She had apparently decided yes. He booked the table for Friday, 2 days away. He would use the time to let the reality settle fully into his bones, and then he would sit across from her at that table and begin not with the number, but with the letter. He wanted her to understand who Uncle Bill was before she understood what he'd left behind. The champagne was an impulse. He stopped at a wine shop 20 minutes from home, stood in the climate-controlled aisle longer than necessary, and chose a bottle with the mild self-consciousness of a man who knows very little about champagne, but understands that the occasion is real. The woman at the register wrapped it in tissue paper without being asked. He thanked her and carried it out in a brown paper bag. Petra was home when he arrived. She was at the kitchen counter, still in her work clothes, scrolling through her phone with the tight-shouldered posture of someone in the middle of a problem they haven't solved yet. She looked up when he came in, gave him the abbreviated version of a greeting, his name, a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes, and looked back down. "Long day?" he asked. "The usual," she said. "Budget stuff." He nodded. He had heard some version of this answer for most of the past 18 months, and he had learned not to push. The hospital's administrative politics were a specific kind of exhausting, and Petra processed work stress privately, always had. He set the paper bag on the counter and crossed to the refrigerator. "What's that?" she asked, not looking up. "Champagne," he said, "for Friday. I made a reservation." She made a small sound. Acknowledgement? Not quite interest. "Where?" "Fiore." A pause. "The place on Madison?" "Yeah." She didn't say anything else. He placed the champagne on the refrigerator's middle shelf, where he would see it every morning when he opened the door. Then he made dinner. Simple, efficient, and they ate mostly in the comfortable quiet that long marriages sometimes produce. Petra's phone buzzed twice. She flipped it face down both times without checking it, which was unusual enough that August noticed, and then he set the observation aside, because the simplest explanation was almost always work. After dinner, he went upstairs. He changed, brushed his teeth, sat on the edge of the bed, in the way he sometimes did when he wanted to think without distraction. He had sacrificed things for this life. He knew that clearly, without resentment, the way a builder knows the weight a foundation is carrying. 3 years ago, a firm in Atlanta had called with a partnership offer that was, by any reasonable measure, the kind of opportunity that only comes once: full equity stake. A platform for the kind of civic architecture he actually wanted to do: public buildings, community developments, work that would still be standing in 50 years with his name in the cornerstone. He had flown down for a weekend, walked their projects, shaken the right hands. He had come home and turned it down. Petra was up for a senior administrator role at Cincinnati General that year. They had just started fertility consultations. She had been clear, not demanding, just honest, that she needed stability in her location, her support system, her routine. And August had looked at the offer, and then looked at his wife, and done the only math that felt true to him. They were building something here. The house, the future, the family they were working toward. Atlanta would come back around, or something else would. You didn't abandon a foundation because a different lot looked attractive. He had never brought it up again. He reached into the jacket hanging on the back of the chair and took out the folded page. 4 sentences. He read them once more in the low light of the bedside lamp, then folded the letter back along its crease and set it on the nightstand where he would see it in the morning. Friday, he would begin with this. He would put it in her hands before he said a single number. He wanted her to know there was a man named William Cross who had asked a 12-year-old boy what he wanted to build, and listened to the full answer, and remembered it for 26 years, and decided that was enough. The champagne was cold in the refrigerator downstairs. August lay back and closed his eyes, and in the good quiet of the house he began, slowly and carefully, to find the right words. He bought the tie on his lunch break. It was a small thing, dark green silk, simple, the kind of thing Petra used to notice. He stood at the counter of the men's shop on 4th Street and held it against his shirt in front of the narrow mirror, and decided yes. Small gestures mattered. He had always believed that. He left work at 4:30, which was early enough that his colleague Marcus called after him with a raised eyebrow. August just waved. He had somewhere to be. At home, he changed into his good charcoal suit and knotted the tie carefully in the bathroom mirror. Then he went downstairs, opened the refrigerator, and checked the champagne. Still cold. Right where he'd placed it 4 days ago, the tissue paper still wrapped around the neck. The bottle sitting upright like it was waiting for something. He pulled out his phone and confirmed the reservation. 7 o'clock. Fiore on Madison. Table for 2. By the window if available. He was ready. He felt, in the uncomplicated way of a man about to give someone the best news of their life, genuinely good. He heard Petra before he saw her. The small sound of a chair adjusting. He assumed she was getting up to change. She'd need 20 minutes, maybe 30, and he turned toward the hallway with the easy confidence of a man whose evening was already planned. Then he stopped. Petra was at the kitchen table. She was dressed in her work clothes, the structured navy blazer she wore to board presentations, the one she only took out for days when she needed to feel armored. Her hands were folded on top of a manila folder. Her posture was straight. Her expression was composed in the specific way of someone who has been practicing. The folder sat on the table between them like a document waiting to be opened. Something moved through August. Not understanding, not yet, just the cold animal knowledge that the room was wrong, the temperature of it, the stillness of her. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment that lasted longer than it had any right to, and then he walked to the table and sat down. "August," she said. Her voice was steady. "That was the first thing. I want a divorce. The second. I'm pregnant. It isn't yours. The third." She kept going. Her voice never broke. She said she had been unhappy for years. Not 1 year, not recently, but years, plural, a span of time that reached back past the fertility consultations, past the mortgage, past the Atlanta decision he had never resented. She said she wanted more than he had been able to give her. She said she was in love with someone else, that the pregnancy had accelerated the timeline, that her attorney had prepared everything and all she needed was his signature. She said all of this the way she delivered budget reallocations at work. Clear, sequential, already emotionally concluded, the feelings processed in a room he had never been allowed to enter. The decision finalized before he ever sat down. August did not speak. He was aware, with a precision that would not fully register until later, of several things happening at once. The champagne on the middle shelf of the refrigerator, 3 feet to his left. The reservation at Fiore. The table by the window, 7 o'clock. 1 hour and 40 minutes away. The folded page in his breast pocket, pressed against his chest beneath the good charcoal suit, beneath the new dark green tie, directly over his heart. He sat with all of it. Petra had stopped talking. She was watching him with the faint tension of someone braced for an impact that hadn't come yet. He reached forward and picked up the folder. He opened it. He read every page, all 4. He did not skim. He did not rush. He found every line marked for signature, and he read the surrounding text before he signed it, the way he read every contract, because he was the kind of man who did not put his name on something he hadn't fully understood. When he was finished, he clicked the pen closed, set it parallel to the folder's edge, and slid the whole thing back across the table. Petra looked down at it, then up at him. She had steeled herself for an argument. He could see the architecture of that preparation still standing in her face, the arguments she'd loaded and not fired, the emotions she'd braced to manage. His composure had nowhere to go in her plan for this conversation. She opened her mouth slightly, closed it. August stood. "I hope everything goes well for you," he said. He meant it, in the strange, distant way of a man speaking from very far inside himself. Then he walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. He sat on the edge of the bed. Their bed. 6 years. The quilt her mother had given them was folded at the foot of it, the same place it had been every morning he had woken up in this house. He looked at the wall. He did not think about Columbus. He did not reach for his phone, or for the letter in his pocket, or for any of the words he had spent 4 days arranging into the right order. He simply sat, and the room held its quiet around him, and everything that had been meant for both of them settled, slowly and without ceremony, into the shape of something that belonged only to him. She came back on a Tuesday, 5 days after the kitchen table, 5 days after the folder and the pen and the words she delivered without flinching. August was in the living room when he heard her key in the lock. He set down his coffee and stood, not from surprise, but because standing felt right. She came in with 2 empty boxes under her arm and a careful expression. Not guilty exactly, but managed. The same management she brought to every difficult interaction. She said, "I won't be long," without looking at him directly. "Take what you need," he said. She went upstairs. He heard the closet open, drawers, the bathroom cabinet, the specific sounds of a life being sorted into what stays and what goes, decisions being made room by room about what had been hers all along. He waited downstairs. When she came back down, both boxes were full. She had her work bag over one shoulder, and her grip on the top box was slightly awkward, the cardboard bending under the weight. August crossed the room, took the bottom box from the stack without asking, and carried it to her car. Then he came back and got the second one. He set it in the trunk beside the first. He closed the trunk. Petra was watching him from the driveway with an expression he couldn't fully name. Something between gratitude and confusion, like she was trying to place a word in a language she only half spoke. He met her eyes. He nodded once. Then he went back inside and closed the door. He called Nadine at 7. She picked up on the second ring, already bright with some story about her day, and he waited for a pause and then said, "Petra left me." What followed was approximately 45 seconds of Nadine at full volume. He held the phone slightly away from his ear and let it run its course. She covered the necessary ground. Her immediate feelings about Petra. Her immediate feelings about the situation. A pointed revisiting of several specific moments from the past 2 years where she had said something was off. Had she not said that? Had she not said it repeatedly? And then she stopped to breathe. "August, how long have you known?" 5 days. 5 days, and you're just calling me now. There was something else I needed to sit with first. She paused at that. Nadine could read his register as well as anyone alive. She knew the difference between his "I'm fine" voice and his "something is happening" voice. What something else? He told her about Columbus, about Philip Garrett, and the mahogany conference table, and the 4 hours and the number at the top of the asset summary that had not changed no matter how many times he looked at it. He told her about the letter, 4 sentences folded in his pocket. He told her about the champagne in the refrigerator and the reservation at Fiore and the new tie, and he told her that he had been carrying all of it home to give to Petra on Friday like a gift, and that Petra had been sitting behind a folder when he arrived. The silence that followed was the longest Nadine had ever produced. He had known his sister for 34 years, and she had never once in that time gone this quiet for this long. August. Her voice was different now, stripped down. She doesn't know. No. You signed the papers, and you didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. Another silence. Then she made a sound he had no category for. Not quite a laugh, not quite something else. A sound that seemed to come from the part of a person that responds when words aren't sufficient. Okay, she said. Steadier now, the sharpness of her returning. Okay. August, what are you going to do? He told her he didn't fully know yet, but that something had been sitting wrong in him. And it wasn't just the divorce. It was a specific detail. 2 months ago, Petra had mentioned a fertility clinic appointment she said needed to be rescheduled. He had checked his own calendar at the time and found nothing new booked. He had assumed she would handle it. He had not asked again. He was thinking about that now. He opened his laptop while Nadine was still on the line. The clinic's patient portal loaded on the first try. Shared access, granted to them both at the start of consultations 18 months ago. He had not been back in since his own results returned clean. The doctor had confirmed his fertility was unremarkable. Normal in every measure. He had told Petra that evening. She had called it a relief. He read through the appointment history now. 4 scheduled consultations. He had attended all 4. But the records showed something different on Petra's side. 2 of their joint appointments listed only her as the attending patient. Not rescheduled, not cancelled on both ends. He had been marked as a no-show on visits he remembered sitting through. He kept reading. At the bottom of the file, a coordinator's notation dated 7 months ago. Patient attended solo session. Requested information, RT, alternative conception pathways, and donor compatibility. Husband not present. Materials provided. August read it twice. He set the laptop on the coffee table and looked at it from a small distance. The way he looked at plans when something in the structure didn't add up. Nadine said his name softly. He had forgotten she was still there. She wasn't trying to have my child, he said. She was maintaining the appearance of it. Nadine didn't respond. There was nothing to add. I'm calling an attorney, August said. Not to reverse the divorce. That's done, and I'm not interested in reversing it. But she walked away from that table not knowing what she left behind. And before this is over, she's going to understand exactly what that cost her. He reached across the coffee table and picked up the legal pad beside his laptop. He found a pen. He wrote 2 words at the top of the first clean page in his careful, even hand. Full inventory. He uncapped the pen and began. He called Claudette Morrow at 8:15 the next morning. Philip Garrett had included her name and number in the estate paperwork. A single handwritten line at the bottom of the referral page. For dissolution matters, if needed. Claudette Morrow. She is specific. August had not known what that meant at the time. He was beginning to understand. Her assistant put him through inside of 2 minutes. Claudette herself spoke in the efficient, unhurried way of someone who does not waste the first 60 seconds of a phone call. She asked 3 questions: the nature of the matter, whether the divorce filing had been processed by the court, and whether Philip Garrett had briefed her on the estate. He answered all 3. She told him to come in at 11. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building on 4th Street, clean-lined and spare in the way that signals intention rather than austerity. No motivational quotes on the walls. No framed diplomas positioned for the visitor's benefit. Just a wide desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the city with complete indifference to whoever was sitting beneath it. Claudette Morrow was 50 years old by appearance, possibly less. With close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she removed when August sat down. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her and a pen in her hand. She looked at him the way people look when they intend to actually listen. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't edit." He told her everything, from the Columbus meeting to the kitchen table, to the patient portal notation, to the legal pad on his coffee table, with 2 words at the top. He spoke without rushing and without embellishment. She did not interrupt once. She wrote occasionally, quick notations he could not read from his side of the desk. And when he finished, she set the pen down and looked at him directly for a moment, before she spoke. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state," she said. "That means marital assets get divided fairly, not necessarily evenly, but fairly, based on what each party contributed and what the court considers just. Inheritance is treated differently. An inheritance received during a marriage carries significant legal protection, provided it is kept entirely separate from marital assets. No commingling, no joint accounts, no shared use in ways that blur the line." "I haven't touched it," August said. "The transfer is in progress and hasn't cleared into any account Petra has access to." "Good," Claudette made a note. "The divorce papers are signed, but not yet processed by the court. That means the marriage is not legally dissolved. That window, between signing and court processing, is where we work. If we move deliberately and structure the inheritance correctly before that window closes, we can protect it entirely." "How long do we have?" "Long enough, if we start today." She turned the legal pad slightly toward her. "I need a forensic review of your joint finances. Everything. Bank records, transfers, the full transaction history for the last 2 years. Do you have someone you trust for that kind of work? Or do you need a referral?" "I have someone," August said. Harold Ossie had been doing forensic accounting for 15 years. He had built his practice on reputation alone. Clients found him because someone whose financial wreckage he'd sorted through had sent them. August had watched him work. Harold was precise and completely unflappable, and he was the only person outside of Nadine that August trusted with something like this. "Authorize him today," Claudette said. "Tell him I'll need everything documented to a standard that holds in court. Clean chain of custody on every record." "Understood." She set her pen down flat and looked at him. "From this point forward, you do not discuss finances directly with Petra. No phone calls about settlement terms, no email exchanges, no in-person conversations that touch the assets. Everything routes through me. Can you do that?" "Yes," August said without hesitation. She nodded once, satisfied. She began to close the folder on her side of the desk, the small motion of a meeting reaching its natural end. August stayed seated. "One question," he said. She looked up. "If everything Harold finds is what I think he'll find, if the full picture is what I believe it is, does Petra receive anything from the inheritance?" Claudette held his gaze. She did not soften the answer or qualify it, or reach for a word that was gentler than the one she meant. "Not a dollar," she said, "if we do this correctly." He called Harold from the parking garage, 4 floors below street level, standing beside his car in the gray concrete quiet. Harold answered on the 3rd ring, mid-sentence in something he immediately set aside. August told him what he needed. Harold asked 2 clarifying questions and then said, "I'll start Monday." That was all. That was Harold. August drove home. He came inside, set his keys on the counter, and stood for a moment in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed against the far wall. He opened it. The champagne was still there on the 2nd shelf, right where he'd put it 4 days ago, the gold foil catching the light. He looked at it for a long moment. He closed the refrigerator door. It would stay. He wasn't ready for it yet, but he would be. Harold's office was not what people expected. There was no heavy furniture, no shelf of thick binders meant to impress. Just 2 long folding tables pushed together, a pair of monitors, and stacks of paper organized in a way that looked chaotic until you understood the system, which Harold did completely, and no one else needed to. He had called August and Claudette that morning, told them both to come at 2, told them to bring nothing except themselves. They sat across from him now, side by side, in 2 chairs that didn't match. Claudette had her legal pad. August had his hands folded on the table in front of him. Harold stood. He almost always stood when he presented. He said it kept him honest. He picked up the first stack of paper. "I'm going to go in order," he said. "Don't stop me until I'm done." Neither of them did. The first layer took 12 minutes to walk through. 19 months. That was how long it had been going on. Not a sudden decision. Not a moment of weakness. A sustained, deliberate construction. The kind that requires patience and planning and a complete belief that the person being taken from will never look closely enough to see it. Petra had opened a personal savings account at a credit union on the west side of Cincinnati, 14 days before the first transfer hit. August's name was not on it. His signature had never been anywhere near it. It existed entirely outside of anything they had built together, and she had been feeding it steadily for a year and 7 months, while he sat across from her at dinner and asked about her day. $800 on a Tuesday in March, $1,200 in May, $2,000 in July, split across 3 separate transactions 4 days apart. Never enough at once to surface as irregular. Never the same amount twice in a row. The pattern was deliberate. August could see that even from the summary page, the careful, administrative precision of someone who understood how attention works and calibrated around it. The total was $67,000. He had paid the mortgage every month. He had funded their joint retirement contributions. He had written the checks for every fertility consultation, every lab fee, every follow-up appointment he attended, believing he was building something. She was building something too. Just not with him. Harold set the first stack down. He did not editorialize. He moved to the second. The apartment was in the Ashby family's name. Ford Ashby's parents, to be precise. A downtown Cincinnati address. 12-story building, secured entry. Harold had pulled the lease record through property filings and cross-referenced it against Petra's debit card activity. She had accessed that building 41 times. Harold read several of the dates aloud. Wednesdays, Saturday afternoons, 3 separate Friday evenings when Petra had told August she was presenting at a professional development conference at the hospital's main campus. He did not say anything additional about that. He didn't need to. The travel records came next. 6 trips over 14 months. Chicago twice. Nashville 4 times. August remembered most of them. Petra had mentioned each one in advance, briefly, the way you mention something that doesn't require discussion. He had not questioned any of them. He had no reason to. Harold had pulled Ford Ashby's credit card records through a channel he did not detail and did not need to. The charges were there. Same hotels, same cities, same dates. Not nearby properties, not adjacent blocks. The same buildings, the same floors, the same check-in dates and check-out dates, aligned with Petra's flights to within a matter of hours. Harold set the second stack down. The third took the least time to explain and landed the heaviest. Ford Ashby's financial position, once Harold pulled it apart, was a surface with very little beneath it. The leased vehicle, a luxury SUV registered through a dealership that had processed 6 prior leases for Ashby family members. The downtown apartment his parents carried on paper. The executive title at a real estate investment firm that his family had primarily capitalized and that was currently carrying 2 unresolved creditor disputes, both documented in public filings Harold had pulled in under an hour. No significant independent asset. No liquidity that wasn't connected to someone else's generosity or someone else's name. What Ford Ashby had was the convincing appearance of a man who had built something. What he had actually built was a very well-maintained impression. Petra had done the math on her marriage and decided August was her ceiling. She ran the numbers on the wrong man. Harold set the third stack down and looked at August. August had not moved, had not changed his expression in any direction that Harold could identify. He sat with his hands still folded on the table and looked at the 3 stacks of paper in front of him for a moment before he spoke. "Is any of this traceable back to you?" August said. "If it goes to court." Harold met his eyes. "Not a thread," he said. August nodded once. He thanked Harold, simply, directly, and gathered the documents into the folder Harold had already prepared for him. Claudette collected her own copy and said she would be in touch by end of week. Then August stood, shook Harold's hand, and left. He sat in the driveway for a while when he got home. The engine was off. The documents were on the passenger seat. The neighborhood was quiet in the way of late afternoons in October, a few leaves moving at the edge of the yard, the sky the color of something cooling. He sat with it, all of it. Not just the numbers and the records and the forensic precision of what Harold had laid out in 3 careful stacks, but the full, unedited picture of what those numbers meant. 19 months, 41 visits, 6 trips, $67,000, moved in careful increments from the account of a man who never once thought to look. He was not a man who cried easily. He had not cried since the night Petra left. He did not cry now either. He picked up the folder, got out of the car, and went inside. The legal pad was on the coffee table where he'd left it. He sat down, opened the folder, and began to add. The settlement proposal arrived on a Thursday. Claudette called August that afternoon and read it to him over the phone, her voice carrying the same flat, unhurried tone she used for everything, as though the document she was describing was a grocery list rather than Petra's formal claim on the life he'd built. Equal split of the home equity, half of what remained in the joint savings account, 2 years of spousal support. There was also a second request, attached separately. Petra wanted a face-to-face meeting with August, no attorneys present, to discuss the house specifically. Her attorney framed it as an opportunity for a more personal resolution. Less adversarial, the letter said. More human. August listened without comment until Claudette finished. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think her attorney wrote that letter, believing you're still operating from grief." Claudette paused. "And I think agreeing to the meeting is useful." "Useful how?" "It lets you take her temperature without revealing ours. She doesn't know what Harold found. She doesn't know how we've structured the inheritance. She's going to walk into that room believing she has leverage, and people who believe they have leverage talk more than they should." Another pause. "I want to know how much she knows about her own position. A conversation with you will tell me that faster than anything her attorney puts in writing." August thought about it for a moment. "All right. Don't volunteer anything. Don't confirm anything. Listen more than you speak." Claudette's voice was precise. "And call me after." Petra arrived at the house on a Saturday morning. She had dressed carefully, not formally, but with the specific studied casualness of someone who wanted to appear relaxed. Dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse, the small gold earrings she wore when she wanted to seem approachable rather than professional. August noticed all of it, the way he noticed structural details in a building. Not judgment, just accurate reading. He had made coffee, 2 cups. He set them on the kitchen table and sat down across from the chair she had always used. The same table, the same 2 seats, different morning entirely. She came in and smiled at him, warm, careful, the smile she used when she wanted a room to feel safe. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said. "I know it isn't easy." August nodded. He said nothing. "I just think—" She paused, seeming to choose her words. "I think we're both adults. I think we built something together, and it deserves more than lawyers going back and forth over spreadsheets." She looked at him across the table. "I still care about you, August. That's real. And I want us to be able to close this chapter without bitterness. I really do." He listened to all of it. He let the silence sit for a breath after she finished. "I appreciate that," he said. Petra relaxed slightly. Her shoulders came down a fraction. She began to talk about the house, her feelings about it, the memories, the practical reality of its value on the current market. She was measured and reasonable. She had clearly rehearsed the broad outline of this, though she was flexible enough within it that the rehearsal wasn't obvious. She was good at this. He had always known that. He let her finish. Then, without any particular change in his tone, the same quiet register he'd been using since she walked in, he asked, "How's Ford doing?" The room stopped. It was not a dramatic stillness. Petra did not gasp or flinch or knock over her coffee. But she went still in the way that people do when the ground shifts without warning. A full-body pause, brief and complete. Her eyes holding his for just a moment too long before anything else moved. She hadn't told him the name. He knew that. She knew that. Both of them were aware, in that suspended second, of exactly what had just passed between them. Then she recovered. She was good at recovering. "How did you—" She stopped, restarted. "We don't need to do this." "I'm not doing anything," August said. "I asked a simple question." Her jaw tightened, just slightly. "He's fine." August nodded. He took a sip of his coffee. Then he set the mug down and told her, calmly, that he needed a few more weeks before he could move forward on the settlement. He had some family estate matters he was still working through. Nothing he could discuss in detail yet. He appreciated her patience. Petra looked at him for a moment, searching for something in his face. He could tell. Some foothold that would tell her what he actually knew and how much of it mattered. She didn't find it. She left 20 minutes later, still composed on the surface, but moving through the front door with the faint, unmistakable energy of a woman who had come in holding all the cards and was no longer entirely sure of the count. August called Claudette from the back porch. He told her everything. The settlement pitch, the warmth, the moment. He heard her breathe once, slowly, on the other end. "Good," she said. "They're going to sit on that name question and convince themselves it doesn't mean anything, which means they won't adjust their position before I need them not to." "Where are we?" August asked. "One more week," Claudette said. "Everything is nearly in position." The birthday party was at a rooftop bar in Oakley, the kind of place with string lights and overpriced drinks and enough background noise that you could have a real conversation if you stood close enough. Nadine had almost skipped it. She wasn't in the mood for small talk, and lately every social gathering felt like an exercise in managing her face, while people asked about August and the divorce and how he was holding up. She was tired of managing her face, but she'd promised the birthday girl, so she went. She spotted Diane Whitfield near the edge of the rooftop, holding a glass of white wine and watching the city below with the relaxed posture of someone not particularly interested in circulating. Nadine had met Diane a handful of times over the years. Mutual friends, Petra's orbit. The usual overlapping social geometry of a mid-sized city. She knew the broad outline of what had happened between them. Petra had removed Diane as a bridesmaid 6 months before the wedding over something small. A scheduling conflict. A tone in a text message. The kind of minor friction that reasonable people resolve and unreasonable ones weaponize. Diane had been replaced without ceremony. The friendship had not recovered. Nadine walked over. They started with the easy things. Work, the birthday girl, the drinks. Diane was warm and direct. The kind of person who didn't bother with conversational padding once the first few minutes had settled. After a while, she looked at Nadine with a slight tilt of her head. "How's your brother doing?" she asked. "Actually doing, I mean. Not the version people say when they don't want to answer the question." Nadine looked at her for a moment. "He's steady," she said. "Working through it." Diane nodded slowly. She swirled her wine. Then she said, without particular drama, "There are some things I've been sitting on for a while. About Petra. About why she left." She glanced at Nadine. "I don't know if it's useful at this point, but I've thought about whether to say something, and I keep coming back to the same answer." Nadine went very still. "Say it," she said. Diane set her glass on the railing. "Ford doesn't have real money," she said. "Not his own." Petra knew that. He told her himself. She described it to me as this vulnerable, honest moment between them, like he was really letting her in. The corner of Diane's mouth moved. He told her his family had the assets, that his firm was still getting established, that things were complicated, but he was building toward something. And Petra's response to that was what? Nadine asked. Diane looked at her evenly. "She said it was fine." "She said?" She paused, and Nadine could see her pulling the exact words back up, holding them carefully. "She said she wasn't worried about it, because she wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was going to make sure the settlement gave them a real foundation." Her exact words, "a real foundation." Diane's voice didn't shift in pitch, but something in it sharpened. She said August was predictable, that he wouldn't fight it, that she knew how to handle him. She picked up her glass again. "She said the divorce was going to be the best financial move she ever made." The string lights hummed above them. Somewhere behind them a group laughed loudly at something. Nadine heard none of it. "She wasn't leaving because she was unhappy," Nadine said. It was not quite a question. "She may have been unhappy," Diane said. "I genuinely don't know. But that's not what drove the timing. The timing was about the money. She had a number in her head. She had a plan. She looked out at the city. She just didn't have all the information." Nadine called August from the parking garage on the way out. He picked up on the second ring. She told him everything. Diane's words, the exact phrase Petra used, the number, the plan, the confidence. She told him all of it without editorializing, because August didn't need her to translate it. He just needed the facts. He listened without making a sound. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then August said, "She sat across from me at that table. She handed me those papers, and she never once thought to ask if there was something I hadn't told her yet." Nadine didn't have anything to add to that. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Okay," he said finally. His voice was level, quiet in the way of a man who has just watched the last piece of a very long puzzle settle into place. "Okay." Claudette filed the formal response the following morning. It was thorough, precise, and relentless. Every transfer, all $67,000 of it, documented to the penny, with dates, amounts, and the account they landed in. The fertility clinic records, the travel documentation, the hotel charges on matching dates in matching cities, every instance of marital waste laid out in clean, numbered sequence, each one a weight added to the scale. The settlement requests were contested in full. The house, the spousal support, the joint savings split. All of it challenged on grounds of financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The inheritance was not mentioned anywhere in the filing. That card stayed in the deck. Petra's attorney called Claudette the following morning. The easy confidence that had colored every communication since the first settlement letter was gone. The invitation was simple. Nadine sent it. A group text to Jerome, Beverly, and Petra, worded casually, nothing that would raise flags. "August wants to get everyone together to talk about Grandma Ruth's birthday. Sunday dinner at the house. He's cooking." Petra responded within 20 minutes. "Of course. I'll be there." August read the reply and set his phone face down on the counter. He spent Saturday afternoon in his parents' kitchen, which smelled the way it always had. Warm and specific, like something that couldn't be manufactured. He made the lamb, the roasted potatoes with rosemary, the green beans his mother had taught him to cook simply, with garlic and a little lemon. The same meal he had made for Petra on their third date in his old apartment on Vine Street, when she'd sat on his kitchen counter and talked to him while he cooked, and he'd thought, quietly and with complete certainty, that he was going to marry her. He had not planned this detail as a weapon. It was something more deliberate than that. He wanted her to see it, to recognize it, to sit at that table and feel the weight of what she was sitting inside. Not because he wanted to cause pain, but because he wanted the room to be honest before he was. Petra arrived at 6:15, a bottle of wine in hand, wearing a soft gray wrap dress and the easy warmth she always brought to cross-family gatherings. She hugged Beverly first, then Jerome, then Nadine, who returned the hug with perfect, practiced neutrality. Then she walked into the dining room and stopped. She looked at the table, at the dishes being carried in from the kitchen, at the lamb, the potatoes, the green beans with lemon. Her eyes moved to August, who was setting a serving spoon on the table with his back half turned to her. The flicker crossed her face, recognition, and beneath it something softer and more complicated. She opened her mouth slightly. August turned, met her eyes, and smiled the way a good host smiles at a guest. "Glad you made it," he said. "Sit anywhere." She sat. Dinner was warm and unhurried. Jerome talked about a neighbor's fence dispute, with the slow pleasure of a man who found minor local drama genuinely entertaining. Beverly asked Nadine about a community event she'd been organizing. Petra laughed at the right moments and contributed easily, and August watched her guard come down the way he knew it would, because she was good at this, and because nothing about the evening looked like what it was. Philip Garrett sat near the end of the table and said very little. He had been introduced before dinner as an old friend of the family from Columbus, visiting for the weekend. He ate slowly and listened with the unhurried attention of a man with nowhere else to be. After the plates were cleared and Beverly had brought out coffee, August remained seated. He folded his hands on the table. The room didn't change. Beverly still had her cup. Jerome was still leaning back in his chair, but something in the quality of the quiet shifted, and Petra felt it. Her eyes moved to August. He began to speak. His voice was even, not cold, but still, the way a building is still, solid all the way through. He told her about the downtown apartment on 4th Street, the lease in Ford Ashby's family name, her debit card accessing the building on Tuesday and Thursday evenings across 14 months, on nights she had told him she was working late. He gave the dates without editorializing, just the dates. He told her about Chicago and Nashville, the 6 trips in 14 months, the hotel charges on Ford Ashby's credit card, same cities, same dates, same properties, same floors. Petra straightened. "August," he continued, "the fertility clinic, the 4 joint appointments scheduled, the 2 she canceled, the 2 she attended alone, the coordinator's notation from the solo visit, the request for information about alternative conception and donor compatibility made without her husband present. You were never trying," he said. Not an accusation. A fact, placed carefully on the table like a document awaiting review. You were performing the attempt. "There's a difference." Her mouth closed. He told her about the $67,000, the private account at the credit union across town, the 19 months of incremental transfers, 800 here, 2,000 there, calibrated precisely to stay beneath the threshold of his attention while he paid the mortgage, funded their shared retirement account, and wrote checks to the fertility clinic for a process she had already privately abandoned. Beverly Cross set down her coffee cup. Jerome had gone very still. Petra said, "That's not," and then stopped, because she was a precise woman, and she knew the sentence had nowhere honest to go. August let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, "There's one more thing." He looked at Philip Garrett. Garrett reached down, opened the leather portfolio he had carried in, and set beneath his chair, and placed a single document on the table. August picked it up and slid it across to Petra. 8 days before you handed me those papers," August said, "I drove to Columbus. My great-uncle William Cross passed away 11 weeks before we sat at our kitchen table. He left me his estate." He tapped the document. $41.3 million. Commercial properties in 3 states. Liquid assets. An art collection. I came home that night planning to tell you on Friday. I had a reservation. I had champagne in the refrigerator. He paused. I had his letter in my pocket when I sat down across from you. Petra looked at the number on the page. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they cannot fully make their eyes accept. You signed those papers, she said. Her voice was barely level. You handed them to me, August said. I read them. I signed them. And you never once thought to ask if there was something I hadn't told you yet. The string of words landed and stayed there, filling the room like a change in air pressure. Jerome Cross set his cup down on the saucer, slowly. He looked at Petra for a long moment, not with anger, but with the specific and permanent withdrawal of a man who has seen everything he needed to see and has nothing left to extend. I think, Jerome said quietly, you should go. Petra stood. She didn't reach for the document. She didn't speak. She picked up her purse from the back of her chair and walked to the front door. And the house was quiet when it closed behind her. August gathered the remaining dishes from the table and carried them to the kitchen. He moved without hurry, rinsing plates, stacking them beside the sink. The familiar sounds of the house settled around him. The low hum of the refrigerator, Beverly's quiet voice from the dining room, the creak of Jerome's chair. A hand came down briefly on his shoulder. August stilled. Jerome stood beside him for just a moment, not facing him, not saying a word. Then his father's hand lifted, and Jerome walked slowly back toward the dining room. August turned back to the sink. Claudette called August at 7:53 in the morning. He was still in Columbus. He'd stayed the night at a hotel, rather than make the drive back in the dark after dinner. He answered on the second ring. Petra's attorney called at 7:15, Claudette said. No greeting. She didn't use them when something was moving. He wants an urgent call this morning. I told him 10 o'clock. What's his tone? Different than it was 2 weeks ago. August set down his coffee cup. I'll be back in Cincinnati by 9. He didn't need to be present for the call. Claudette would have told him that directly if he'd asked, but he drove back anyway, took a seat in the small waiting area outside her office, and read through structural drawings on his laptop while her door stayed closed. She came out at 11:40. Sit down, she said. He followed her inside. Claudette laid it out the way she did everything, sequentially, without embellishment. Petra's attorney had come to the call with arguments. He'd led with the house, pivoted to spousal support, and circled back to the inheritance when the first two went nowhere. He had framed it as a question of equity, of what Petra had contributed to the marriage, of what it meant, legally, for an asset to be received during a marriage, regardless of source. Claudette had let him finish. Then she had explained, with the patience of someone who had anticipated every word of it, exactly how Ohio law distinguished between inherited assets and marital property, and exactly what it required to make that distinction ironclad. She had met every requirement. The inheritance had been documented, structured, and separated with the kind of precision that did not leave threads to pull. He pushed on the timing, Claudette said. The inheritance was received while the marriage was technically still active. And I showed him the structuring timeline. The filing predates the transfer finalization, but the legal architecture we built around it accounts for that completely. There is no angle there. He knows it. He was checking whether I knew it. She paused. I knew it. August nodded slowly. The $67,000 is documented to the penny, Claudette continued. That amount is deducted from her share of the joint assets before any calculation begins. Marital waste findings reduce her position further. What remains of the joint assets, after her own withdrawals are accounted for, is what she receives. No inheritance. No house. Your name, your down payment, your mortgage history. No spousal support. Claudette set her pen down. She is walking away with approximately what she put in, minus what she already took. The room was quiet. He said they'd litigate, August said. He did. What did you do? I sent him calendar invitations. Claudette folded her hands on the desk. Harold's deposition, the fertility clinic records, the full travel documentation, hotels, dates, floors, all of it, scheduled for the following week. I sent the invitations while we were still on the call. How long before he responded? 4 hours and 11 minutes. The corner of her mouth moved, barely. The threat was withdrawn. They will accept the terms. The civil filing against Ford Ashby had moved on a separate but parallel track, and Claudette walked August through its resolution with the same economy. Alienation of affection was still a viable tort under Ohio law, and Harold's documentation had built the evidentiary foundation with the kind of thoroughness that made a trial unnecessary to threaten seriously. The filing had become a matter of public record. Ford's family name was attached to the apartment lease. It was attached to 2 of his firm's key professional relationships. It was attached to the social architecture that constituted most of what Ford Ashby actually had. The family applied its own pressure, quietly, quickly, and with the specific efficiency of people who understood that exposure was more damaging than settlement. Ford settled within the week. The figure, Claudette said, has been directed according to your instructions. The Cross Foundation's inaugural scholarship fund. August had given that instruction without deliberation, without drama, the same morning he'd told Claudette to proceed with the filing. He didn't announce it. He simply knew. He signed the final papers on a Thursday morning. The documents were arranged across Claudette's conference table in the same orderly sequence she brought to everything. August sat down, read every page with complete, unhurried attention, the same way he had read the first set, at a kitchen table on a Friday evening, with champagne in the refrigerator and a letter folded against his chest. The difference was everything. He signed all 4 places. He set the pen down. "Thank you," he said. Claudette gathered the pages. "It was the most thoroughly documented case I've worked in 3 years. August looked up. "I'm an architect," he said. "I don't build anything without a complete set of drawings." Claudette looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but the controlled, precise shape of one that almost was. She stood and extended her hand. He shook it. He walked out into the afternoon. The October air was cold and clear, the kind of day that felt like it had edges. He stood on the sidewalk outside Claudette's building, hands in his coat pockets, and looked up at the sky for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Nadine. He called Nadine from the sidewalk, and she picked up before the second ring. "It's done," he said. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then, August. Just his name, but she put everything in it. 14 months later, August Cross lived in Atlanta. The partnership offer had waited for him with the particular patience of people who understood what they were waiting for. When he called the firm's managing partner, a steady, plain-spoken man named Darren Okafor, who had made the original offer 3 years prior, Darren had listened to August's terms without interrupting, and said, simply, "We were hoping you'd come back around." August brought his estate holdings. He brought his design credentials. He brought the community center renderings he'd started in Cincinnati on a legal pad. The same pad where he'd once written full inventory at the top of an otherwise blank page and finished in a 1-bedroom apartment off Peachtree while boxes sat half unpacked around him. The community center had won a regional design award 6 weeks before he accepted Darren's offer. It followed him south, like it had always been heading there. Now, it was rising from actual ground, steel and glass and poured concrete, in a West Atlanta neighborhood that had been waiting a long time for someone to build something in it that wasn't temporary. August visited the site on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, arriving before the crew, walking the perimeter with his coffee and his drawings, reading the structure the way he read everything, looking for what held and what didn't, looking for where the weight was actually going. His name was on the building permit. His name was on the renderings pinned inside the site trailer. He had not tired of seeing it there. The mixed-use development on the west side was the larger project. 42 units of affordable housing folded into the foundation of the plan rather than tacked on as an afterthought, the way affordable housing so often was. August had fought for the structural integration in 3 consecutive planning meetings, drawing the load distribution on a whiteboard while city officials watched, making the case not in the language of charity, but in the language of architecture. This is how you build something that doesn't fail in 20 years. The approvals came through in August's 3rd month in the city. He had not celebrated. Exactly. He had gone back to the office and started the next drawing. The Cross Foundation ran quietly alongside all of it. $2 million from the inheritance, seeded at incorporation. Ford Ashby's civil settlement, which had arrived without fanfare and been directed without announcement, had covered the inaugural scholarship class in full. 6 black architecture students in Ohio and Georgia, selected by a committee that Nadine had assembled with the same organized thoroughness she brought to everything she decided mattered. Philip Garrett sat on the foundation's board. He had accepted the appointment at a brief lunch in Columbus, 4 months after the divorce finalized, with the same measured calm he brought to every professional commitment. Harold Ossie managed the foundation's finances, clean books, quarterly reporting, not a dollar unaccounted for, and made the same dry observation every time he and August spoke. "I've never managed money that started this clean." Nadine ran community outreach from Cincinnati. She also visited Atlanta more than the outreach work strictly required. August had noticed. He had not said anything. She had not offered an explanation, which meant she had also noticed that he'd noticed, and they had arrived at a comfortable arrangement in which neither of them addressed it directly. This was, August understood, a functional aspect of having a sister who was exactly like you in certain ways and entirely unlike you in others. The picture of Cincinnati came to him in fragments, Diane's occasional updates moving through Nadine, offered without ceremony, the way information does when it has simply stopped being a secret. Ford's consistency, Diane reported, had not held up well under the unglamorous weight of impending fatherhood. The downtown apartment lease, held in his family's name, like most things Ford Ashby had, was not renewed. His family's goodwill, it turned out, was finite. His professional title remained intact, but the firm was still carrying its creditor disputes, and Ford was still carrying his family's diminishing patience. Petra had moved into a 2-bedroom rental, a neighborhood she would not have considered 3 years ago, Diane said. Her hospital administrator position was still hers. She was genuinely good at her job, and August had never touched that, had never wanted to. Her competence was real, and it was hers. But the financial architecture she had spent the better part of 2 years constructing had produced a far smaller structure than her blueprints had promised. She had built a careful, calculated exit from a man she had fully assessed. She had landed exactly where she left. August heard this without satisfaction and without grief. He heard it the way an architect reads a structural report on a building that someone else designed, with the neutral recognition of a load-bearing miscalculation that had been visible in the drawings all along, if anyone had known how to read them. On his last night in the Cincinnati house, before the movers came, August had opened the champagne. He did it alone, in the kitchen at 10:15 at night, with the overhead light on and the counters bare. He found a clean glass in the cabinet, one he'd packed and then unpacked specifically for this, and filled it and stood at the counter where Petra used to make her coffee in the mornings, back when that was a thing that happened in this house. He thought about Uncle Bill's letter. 4 sentences. He'd read them so many times that they lived in him now without effort, the way certain things do when they arrive at the exact right moment and reshape the ground beneath everything else. He thought about the Friday that never happened, the reservation on Madison, the new tie, the way he had rehearsed his words on the drive home from Columbus, not with the number, but with the letter. Because he had wanted her to understand the man before she understood the money. He had wanted to give her that. He had been in that car, with the windows down and the October air coming through, genuinely and completely happy. He stood at the counter and drank the champagne slowly. He did not make a toast. He did not say anything out loud. There was nothing left in this kitchen that required words. When the glass was empty, he washed it carefully, set it in the drying rack, and went back to packing. Now he stood on the rooftop terrace of his Atlanta apartment at dusk, phone in hand, the community center renderings pulled up on the screen. The skyline spread out in front of him, warm and wide and unhurried, the last light catching the glass of a dozen buildings at once, the city enormous and indifferent, and full of work that needed doing. He zoomed in on the final phase, the roofline. He had revised it twice already, and he was going to revise it once more, because it wasn't right yet, and he would know when it was right. He had a second date Thursday. Her name was Robin. She was a structural engineer with strong opinions about load-bearing walls and what she called bad coffee, served with false confidence, and she had made him laugh 3 times at the foundation event where they met, which was more than most people managed in a first conversation. He was not rushing anything. He had learned, at considerable cost, with complete attention to every page, the difference between patience and passivity. He scrolled back to the full rendering. The community center, whole, finished in the rendering, if not yet in the ground. His name on the permit. His name on the drawings. He thought briefly, not with bitterness, but with the clean and settled clarity of a man who had read the full account and understood every line of it, of the kitchen table, the folder, the moment he had picked up the pen and signed and said nothing, while carrying in his chest the best thing that had ever happened to him. She thought she was ending his story. She had no idea she was starting it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.